formal back and forth. We're going to take turns reading poems and maybe talking and opening up to you if you have any questions or anything you want to say. Um, and that'll be that.
So
What do you want to do?
You want to start off first?
Sure, yeah, I'll start off. Yeah. I also wanted to say thank you to Daniela for having us here, and Veronica, and this is such a beautiful space. I'm really pleased to be here, and also thank you to my brother who is here with me and is not a poetry fan, but comes to all my things. So. But the first time I heard of Nkosi was when he was in Best American Poetry, and I read that amazing poem, Skin Deep, and then I got to read with him at St. Mark's, and it's like, and I read some of your other work online, and it's just amazing work, especially from somebody who's so young. I wish I was writing that good poetry when I was that young, so.
Thank you.
It's,
Thank you. No, it was really great. So we met at the Best American anthology reading, and getting to know your work as well is very great. I was first struck when studying like poets and stuff. I was first struck by your voice and cadence. It kind of sounded like going back into the people like certain like Robert Lowell, but even further back of people in like religious poets. I think that have a certain type of sound to them when they read, which was really striking. So I really love the music. So then I also try and like find my own music to harmonize.
Okay, that sounds great. And you're a musician too, so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe I'll start with a poem by another poet. Maybe it's a poem you all know, but it's a poem by Amiri Baraka, who's one of my favorites. And it's a poem that he wrote when his name was Leroy Jones, and it's a poem called Preface to a 20-volume Suicide Note. Lately, I've become accustomed to the way the ground opens up and envelops me when I run for a bus. Lately, I've become accustomed to the way the ground opens up and envelops me each time I go out to walk the dog, or the broad-edged silly music the wind makes when I run for a bus. Nobody sings anymore. And now, each night I count the stars, and each night I get the same number. And when they will not come to be counted, I count the holes they leave. Things have come to that. And then, last night, I tiptoed up to my daughter's room and heard her talking to someone. But when I opened the door, there was no one there, only she on her knees, peeking into her own clasped hands. Sorry for the stumble at the beginning.
I'm sorry.
And that poem I've known for many years by heart, but it's become much more relevant to me since I have had my first daughter recently. So she's 19 months old, and maybe I'll read some poems about her later. But I'll start with a poem about my father. I'll read two poems about family, and then maybe you can read something.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one is called The Orchard Keeper. My father wanted to be an apple orchard. To this end, he spent 30 years tortured by the hum of letter sorting machines, which shuffled neither rain nor sleet nor snow nor hail, until his face assumed the sheen of a red delicious whose sorrow the worm only knows. And then I'll read one more. This is the title poem from my first book called Love is a Stone Endlessly in Flight. And that's a line taken from William Carlos Williams' famous book-length poem about Paterson, New Jersey, called Paterson. And so this does talk about Paterson, New Jersey, and also my father, and a whole bunch of other things like that. And Paterson is also important because it's the city where the poet Allen Ginsberg grew up, as well as several other important poets in American poetry, including my teacher, Maria Mazziotti Gillen. So this is Love is a Stone Endlessly in Flight. The great falls strike their silk upon bullheads and trout my father never fished for there. He was about other rivers and falls, about other waters' vagrant currents, calling him home, calling him Dominic, telling stories of a man forever a boy in photographs from the 50s, wearing a cowboy hat with a cat gun cocked in his hand. The Passaic River didn't call him, but the Shenango did. It cut like a glacier through the basalt of millennia. Oh Patterson, oh Williams, what I mean to say is just this. My father's people made their way through trades as dishwashers and factory workers in a city that had no Passaic to buttress it. They and he were always skipping stones and elsewhere rushing eddies, dreaming flocks they wouldn't tend, and orchards full of apples they could never harvest. Oh, rivers of the world, my father died in my arms as I carried him almost to the hospice bed. It was an honor to stoop and cradle him on the threshold of the afterlife, where he, I hope, skips stones with the broken vowels of immigrant angels. Holy green waters that roll on forever. When I went to his fresh grave, I wanted to lay down on the flowers and sleep there, or hug the dirt, but instead I sifted through the packed soil and found 4 flat pebbles to give to my mother. Because the stone lives, the flesh dies, and we know nothing of death or its mills that churn into a place that is not home. Great falls, strike your silk upon bullheads and guide my father to a street lined with linden, where the difficult labor of living is done. Oh, spent shell from the final volley, I hold you in my palm, and I know no metaphor can honor a father. A chance word, William said, upon paper may destroy the world. Dear Dad, I write you exact words dictated by the whirlpool that forms at the confluence of other rivers. Yes, love is a stone endlessly in flight. Thank you.
So, I am going to start out with this piece that was really fun to make. Fun to make in the sense of like the actual form of it. But yeah, I'm just gonna go into it. The only thing that everyone might need to know is that Langston Hughes has a poem that was like pretty famous, I guess, when it came out, like the Negro Speaks of Rivers. So in here, I kind of like reference it just a little bit, kind of like twice. First the title and then somewhere else. So the Negro speaking. This is the Negro speaking of arrival, brutality, of the body's bluest shade, of a cruel country, of its conceits, of our slow widening cage, of dreams I dreamed of dread, of ethos, ethics, of elusiveness, of finding fire festive in skulls, of grief, of gods that do not lull, of historical hides I hide behind, of inside skins I skin inside, of their justice, of our jail time, of death's jargon, of killing in kind, of pale kings who kill, of their breakable law, of language and its hostile drawl, of men their murder or their murdered, of their flippant morale, of the knowledge of nuns, of orders, of the order to drown, of wanting to be particularly as pretty as a sane psychopath, of our qualms, of souls grown deep like rivers, of our ruthless laughs, of a black killer's soliloquy, of a white killer's slights of slights, of being stolen, of timelessness, of theoretical life, of unsaid urgency, of vengeance, of the wisdom of willows that willows weep for me, of Xing the X that once was our names indeed, of your years yellowing at the ends, of our youth that is dead, of what I've learned of finalities. It's from the Song of Zed.
That's an ABCarian, right?
Yeah. So that was the fun part, trying to like make rhyme coming in with the alphabet. So here's another one, or not another Abecedarian, but it's in a different form. And I like the way it sounds too, so I mean, I'm gonna go into this. So what's my brain? A riddle. So there's like it's supposed to be a keyword. It's like what for anytime you hear brain, you can also equate that with name. So you can like just you can transition. So it can the whole poem can mean for both brain and name. So here we go. What's my brain? A riddle. Now my brain is not like your brain. No, my brain will be back or will be bop or be popped, poppable, or can be bought. So, can you read my brain? What's my name? I'll share a clue. What's a prince turn into if not old? Now my brain's soot, African, sought after, Googleable, kinda, but sounds Britannica when failed. I'm appalled, used black brain. Not pain black, but black patrolled. Listen, my brain's red and cozy, winds like tree boughs, undulates, is in code. See, my brain's in a bone sheath. Layered and brittle, these riddled words pretend to seem. Air and return to think. I'll ask again, can you read knotted thought? My brain's both a butte and howls. Oh, my brain's so fly, it's feral, I deem. So these are some of the shorter ones. I'll just read one shorter one. And this is actually really short, and I'll like pass it over. So this is kind of like introductory sort of poems to who I am, but this one's kind of lead into other poems later. So this is Of Evil. Of evil. God sends us all, our pores wetted, to clean our mire, our teeth wetted, to feed our desires. We born are devils, because our flesh instinctually weathers.
Those were so intensely musical, you know. It was really beautiful. Who are some of your influences? Maybe you could talk about that before I read a couple.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of influences kind of growing up, which was like Luis Reyes Rivera was all around me, and people, and like my mom, yeah, she knows. She like she was having like different spaces. I think we went to a Mary Baraka when I was real little. So you can almost have her up here and talk about people that she has on. But yeah, so like Luis Reyes Rivera was very like musical and very intense, political and such. Then I think as years went on, I got into like a craze for like Terrence Hayes' work, which was really dope. And so dealing with form and also music within it. So that was a very like that was. It was really good to see someone who was a black man, but also who was just a person that was able to talk about some very interesting and weird different topics throughout his work, and not in certain like not strictly on terms like one topic, and so maybe political, what he would make people look at him and think that he's gonna write about a political poem, he's a black person, but. I like the range that different writers who attach form and music into it in terms of the topic. So, what about you?
Well, one of my favorite poets is Gerard Manley Hopkins, Victorian English poet who was a priest, and I say that because also he would employ this over the top alliteration, and when I was listening to your poems, I was thinking a little bit of Hopkins and the intensity of his music, and but there's so many. I love Baraka, of course. The late Baraka's output is just extraordinary, so, and he has such a range. But I'll read a poem that's also an Abecedarian, since you read an Abecedarian. I wasn't going to read this one, but this is a poem about Louis Armstrong, and the Abecedarian's a really old form. Some of you probably know that. I think it goes back to like Babylonian places. something like that. Maybe wrong about that, but you know, it's just employs the alphabet, and there's different ways to go about it. You can embed kind of alliterative moments within lines the way Nkosi did, or you can do what I did, which is to start each line with a different letter of the alphabet from A to Z, and sometimes people skip letters and things like that. So I'll read this. This is called Channeling Satchmo. And I love Louis Armstrong. I love jazz music in general. It's one of the biggest influences on my writing. Speaking of influences, to think about how somebody like Charles Mingus, you know, negotiates the musicality of a line as opposed to somebody like Thelonious Monk, right? They have a different approach to the musical phrase and to melody and things like that. So I've learned a tremendous amount from these musicians, and I've tried to apply it to my poetry. So this is called Channeling Satchmo. Artichoke, the melody that catches baritone with blasphemy and handcuffs caterwaul to the welling up within, determined by what you wish to kiss on. Each note is an ear inside your eardrum, flipping your heartbeat to syncopation, gesturing how you gonna get down now, house in a groove that crushes elephants. I sing the way knickers flat on clotheslines, jump the way corn husks get shucked in summer, kill a chord with the wind beneath the wind. Laughter is how I build a better art, make a lung of lungs a god at Jericho's walls, narrate the spark from the fire's last dwindling. O Lord, obligado of the unsaved, protect me from the fallen angels drummed querulous into the rhythms men drawl. Reel past the twang of the banjo that breaks sunset into the hem of horizon. Time moves from West End blues to Skokian, ululating heartache like a mother, voicing combat, licked jaw, cricket toes, wrestling Louisiana jive and scat. X the eyes from your paper dolls and knock yells loose, which bamboozle lightning, subtract zeros from the throats of junked lawn jockeys, ABCing a song that orphans grace. So my attempts to capture some of the magic of Louis Armstrong, and also when I write about jazz musicians, you're also writing about American history, right?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
yeah, it's a way into that, which is really interesting. Yeah. And it's America's indigenous art form, so it's really blessed to have it. I'll read one more poem. It's called Stump Speech, and this poem, during the 2016 presidential election, Hillary Clinton said a thing which other politicians have said before. She said, we campaign in poetry, but we govern in prose. So I was thinking about that, and and I was thinking about that, and then I wrote this poem. So Stump Speech. You undress in poetry, but in prose you redress. You grow old in prose, lose teeth, forget the face of your brother, but call to your dead and dying in poetry. They are rising, your dead, in a column, pitchforking the stratosphere, scattering in want. You want and want and want to know the secret of happiness and stillness, but you spit back the crescent moon's comma and vertebrae your conjectures in prose. You desire in poetry, but you love in prose, until you learn to love the way a poem loves, which is to river out and spindrift and chickadee and yellow.
Oh man, okay, cool. So like, do you find actually any politicians in maybe, have you ever read any of like politicians' prose like work that may have influenced some things, or maybe even speeches?
Oh yeah, like there's a lot of, one of the greatest rhetoricians and speech makers of all time, of course, is Malcolm X, and like reading like The Ballad or The Bullet, you know, that is intensely political, incredibly rhetorically sophisticated, and transcends politics, is really poetry. In terms of politicians today, though, or, you know, but I think you get from political activists, oftentimes you get the best kind of poetry. And we live in a time where we're being constantly buffeted by the drivel of politicians, especially from the right. But and poetry is a site of resistance to all of that, I feel like, you know, for me. So so yeah, I do, you know, I read pretty widely, which I can tell from your work you do as well. So there is, you know, there's always something to be gained from something that you read, regardless of who's written it, you know. Like, I think, but we always can never forget that the poem is like the greatest technology ever invented for generating empathy, right? Like that's the most amazing thing about poetry, you know.
So I'm gonna, I guess, go into the more back into the instead of the political, the theological, where I have a sort of like series of poems that are like these chess poems that I have called 64 Dimensions, and so it's I created a form for it where, you know, it's, so in a chessboard you have 8x8 squares, 8 by 64 squares, and so in this poem, in these poems that I'm writing, basically, you know, creating form where it's like 8 lines long and 8 syllables across, and as much as I can, sometimes I deviate from this last requirement, but I try and include like a black and white image somehow. I mean, it can be like cauliflower or something as one image, and, you know, whatever else, that shadow is the other. So so here we go. So 64 Dimensions, and these series, they're short, but yeah, but they're like 6 micro poems and Ode to the Bishop.